All right.
Hi, Jocelyn.
All right. So go ahead, Jocelyn, ask your first question.
So this year we're doing a project on the Amish school incident. The theme is conflict and compromise. What do you think the main conflict was in the Amish school issue?
I believe that the main conflict was, as has been stated, I think, a number of times, the Amish wanted their own local schools. They are not unlike the folks that live in cities throughout the state, towns that want their school local. And the Amish wanted that for themselves. They had these located within relatively easy driving distance of a collection of Amish farms and homes, and they wanted to maintain that, I think, primarily. And the secondary reason was that they wanted to use their teachers, which in many instances were simply children who had completed the 8 grades and at age 15, 16, 17, 18, they became teachers in one of the area schools. But I think they wanted to keep their schools.
Okay, Jocelyn, the next part.
So was there a compromise, and if so, what was it?
Well, the compromise, it depends on your perspective. The compromise, I think, was really by the state of Iowa. The state of Iowa had its educational standards and the requirements for what happened in local school districts. And I think they were justified in having those particular requirements. The state of Iowa compromised those requirements by allowing a religious group that wanted to conduct its own education for its own children. They allowed them to be exempted from that education, those educational standards, the use of certified teachers and meeting all of the other requirements in the educational standards. So I think the compromise was really on the part of the state of Iowa. They said, we will waive our educational requirements, use of certified teachers, etc. We will waive those for these religious groups.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, Hannah.
Your role was as a representative of the State Department of Education. We know that you came to this issue after the incident.
I'm sorry, I'm having no difficulty understanding you.
Slower and louder.
Okay. Your role was as a representative of the State Department of Education. We know that you came to the issue after the incident. What brought you to work with the Amish, and how did they respond to you?
Okay. I worked in the Iowa Department of, initially the Iowa Department of Public Instruction. I joined the staff there in 1967. And I had a variety of responsibilities in the agency. It changed at a point from public instruction to the Department of Education. And I was working in the curriculum area at that time. And this assignment, I'll say, just came up. And the lady, Edith Monroe, in that curriculum division, retired, and she had been carrying out this responsibility for a number of years, and so it was, if you will, laying on the table. And I had a real interest because I had an interest in the people and their reasons for doing what they were doing. I knew relatively little of them at that point, but I respected what they had gone through to achieve what it was that they wanted, and I was intrigued by pursuing the responsibility. The folks, I think, my perception was that they accepted the oversight of the state continuing, and they seemed to, in some cases, literally embrace me in the sense that the superintendent of the schools that operated in the Kelowna area invited me several times into his home. I shared a very delicious chicken dinner at their table one noon. It was a celebration of his twin son's birthday, and we sat at a table with a delicious meal that included all the fixings that you might expect in a good chicken dinner, and topped off with the birthday cake, which was an angel moon cake with a lovely frosting on it, and everything that we consumed that day had been raised on that property. The chickens, of course, they had raised and then everything else, all of the condiments that were there, all of the ingredients of everything, the eggs and all the rest of it, the potatoes and everything was grown on that property, and I enjoyed that time with the family, and in many other instances was my perception very well received. A number of the schools when I visited them, fathers would be there. In a few rare cases, a mother might be there, and these folks were all welcoming and respectful. So it was from my standpoint, from 1981/2 to the middle of 1996, a very good relationship.
Okay, Mia, go.
You mentioned that you have a deep respect for the Amish and feel you know the culture well. Can you share some of those ideas with us today?
Okay, I'm again.
Okay, I'll say it for her. You talked about knowing the culture well. Can you help us understand a little bit about the culture? You talked about the meal and what you experienced.
The culture, from my perspective, was very, very healthy. The folks seemed to base everything they did in their religious beliefs, and they believed that the farm was a significant element of that, because this was land that God had provided for them, and the land grew for them what it was that they needed to exist. It provided for the foodstuffs out of the ground, and a place where livestock could be born and raised and utilized to sustain the family. They believed in the farm very much. They believed in faith very, very much. Their religion was very important to them. The beliefs that they had were very important to them. And so everything that they did revolved around what it was that they believed. And one of those things that they believed was that the education of their children was their responsibility, biblically so. They were instructed to raise and educate their children, and they took that responsibility very seriously. And just a little side note here, the populations that we're talking about, all these religious groups, have had at that time the exemption. They didn't have to provide anything educationally for their children. They were exempt not only from the use of certified teachers, but they were exempt from meeting any educational requirements. But their religious beliefs, their faith said, we are required to instruct our children. We shall have schools, whether the state or some other governmental body says we need to or not. We will do it. The last thing, or a third element of their culture, is family. They believed intensely in the family. When I visited the Bontraggers in that home that I was talking about for that lunch, I was shown everything that they had in their stores in the basement, and they had bushels of potatoes down there. They had foodstuffs in jars, meats, and everything, every vegetable that you could think of in canned jars, and they had condiments that they had made stored down there. And then he took me outside of the main house to another little house. We would call them in today's world, where we've seen the little houses develop, very, very small homes for couples and families. He took me out to this one, and it was a complete little home. And his mother lived there. His father was deceased, but this home had been built to accommodate her, and all of that family lived on the same physical property, if you will. And the Bontraggers had at that time 10 children. The twin boys were the older children in that family, and then on down to young elementary age children. All of them there in the household, all of them contributing to the livelihood. If they were female, quite likely, their tasks were tending the garden and helping their mother with that responsibility, as well as clothes making and all of the care and keeping of the family done within the house. The males typically out taking care of the livestock, taking care of the crops, doing all of that kind of heavy lifting, if you will. But those three factors, the farm and its significance in their lives, and sustaining their lives, their faith, which is what their existence was all about to begin with, and then the essence of family, because that's what kept them together. That's what enriched their lives. That's what got the job done in terms of tending to the farm and sustaining and maintaining and continuing their faith and their lives as Amish people.
Okay, good. Jocelyn, the next one.
What was the initial position of the State Department, and why did they feel that the Amish schools were inferior?
State that again very slowly and let me get all of what you said.
What was the initial position of the State Department, and why did they feel that the Amish schools were inferior?
Okay, I thought that's what you had said, and I wanted to make sure that was the case. The position, and I'm not sure just exactly in what frame you're asking that, but the position of the state was simply that all children of school age needed to be in an educational setting and needed to be typically enrolled in a public school, and the educational program that they received was dictated by the state in its educational standards, and there was a basic requirement for the teachers of that curriculum to be certified, licensed and certified by the state of Iowa. That's not an unusual set of standards or position for a state to have in terms of its educating its school age population. Now, the second part of that, I'm not sure that I can't speak to in the way that the question is framed, because I'm not sure that there was any sense that the Amish were inferior in some way. The Amish were citizens of the state of Iowa, as they are today. They are citizens of the state of Iowa. As such, they came at that time under the requirements of the state in terms of its educational standards. And the state wanted very much for the Amish to, if they were going to operate their own schools as they were doing at the time, if they were going to do that, they needed to do it meeting the state's curriculum requirements, one, and two, they needed to be instructing their children with certified teachers. The Amish didn't want to do that. And so the state, there were a variety of actions that took place from about 1961 to the 65 incident. But basically they wanted to see these children educated in the same way that all other students in the state of Iowa, children of school age, were educated. I don't think it was a matter of saying that Amish are inferior in some way. What we're saying is that we want you to do what we want you to do, which is use licensed teachers and use the meet the curriculum standards.
Okay, Hannah, slowly and loudly. Go.
Was the school in Hazleton the only one not meeting state standards, or was this statement made by the State Department of Education?
Your question was the school in Hazleton the only one that wasn't meeting?
Right, or were they being made an example of for everybody else to see?
No, I don't think they were. I don't know how many schools throughout the state were operating at that time, and I don't know whether anybody has that particular number right now. But there were certainly a number in a variety of locations around the state of older Amish schools in operation. All of them, I'm quite sure, I can't provide a document that states this, but I'm sure that all of them were operating the very same way that the schools in Hazleton were operating. And that is that they were educating in the subject areas that they chose to educate their children in, and they were using teachers that were not licensed and certified by the state of Iowa. In Hazleton, my understanding is, and there's a part of this that's a little vague. I think that there was perhaps a consolidation with district that was going on, and maybe Art Sensor talked to you about that when you visited with him. And the district wanted the children that were in those Amish schools operating within their geographic area, they wanted them to attend public schools. the issue for them was bringing the students from the country and their various locations, putting them on buses and bringing them to the public schools and teaching them in the public schools. It was not saying to them, the Oline district, my understanding was not saying to the exempt populations, get licensed teachers, teach the curriculum required by the state, but go ahead and do it in your own local schools. They were saying, no, abandon your local schools, put your kids on the school buses, and we're taking them into Hazleton or Owine, and we're going to educate them in public schools and meet the state's requirements doing that. That was, and like I say, there's a history of the Amish parents, the males being, a number of them being arrested, a number of them being hauled into court, a number of them being fined, and going back and forth of this for a period of, I think, at least 4 or 5 years, and then finally and again, you may have the same response from Art Sensor, and he may have a different perspective on this, as I would think that he certainly might, being the superintendent of the district at that time. But it was a matter of saying, no, what you're going to do is get your kids lined up at the bus stops, get them on the buses, get them into the public schools, end the discussion.
He did tell us that if he had to do it over again, he wouldn't do it that way again. So I think he, realized that what happened was very stressful for everybody. Okay, Mia, you're next.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised at all to hear that kind of a report from Art. I would guess that in retrospect, any of the players in that situation, from the governmental side, if you will, lumping them all together, would certainly say, boy, wouldn't do that again. Well, when you look at, and you've seen the pictures, you know what happened with that picture. That picture went not just into the Des Moines Register, but it went statewide, it went nationwide, it went literally worldwide. And the state of Iowa got one huge black eye. We really looked bad, and that's why when he did, Governor Harold Hughes said, "That's it, folks. We're going to find a compromise," and he set the Department of Education to work on it, and a variety of folks, players in that, and they came up with a compromise.
Okay, all right, Mia, nice and slow and loud.
Who were some of the important people in the conflict?
I'm sorry, would you state that again?
Who were some of the important people in the conflict?
I'm not.
Who were some of the important people involved in the conflict?
Oh, who are the important people?
Yes.
Well, in the beginning, obviously a number of Amish folks who were, and these are primarily, not primarily, these are the males. And the males make up the individual local school boards. Each one of those schools, Hickory Grove, Friendship, all of those had their own school boards made up of the parents, the male parents of the children that were in that particular school. obviously very important key players in this because they were the ones that were protecting and addressing the needs and wants of the Amish population to do what they believed God instructed them through His Word in the Bible, period. The other key players obviously were our censor that you have met, and my understanding is that during this period of time, there was a significant change in the composition of the local school board. The school board...
Attention, please. Teachers and students, if you're in the play practice is canceled for tonight. So please make arrangements. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's all right. That was a school announcement of some kind?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So Art, as the superintendent and whoever his other staff people at the top, and in a district that size, it may not be many people beyond Art, may not have been many people beyond Art, and then the local school board. The local school board is the one that sets and enforces the policies in the district, and they say the local board says this is what's going to happen, and the staff, led by the local superintendent, is required to carry those out. And my perception is that it was this newly comprised local board of education that said this is what's going to happen. Those kids are coming here. We're going to educate them in the public schools. And so at that point now, Art may have been right there along with him in making that decision and saying, yes, I support that. But in any event, it was his job to see that it got carried out.
Okay.
And so I think those are the key players.
All right. Next question. Jocelyn, real loud.
All right, so do you have any other information that could help us with our project?
I don't think I've got things that would necessarily help you with your project. The call from UDEP was an impetus for me to start digging through some of the materials that I have. Historically, I carried out this responsibility again from sometime, I think I started in late 81 with my initial visits to schools, and then concluded that with my last visit in the spring of 96. And in 94, I took camera in hand and I went around and made pictures of all of the schools that I was visiting, and I've got colored photographs of all of them in a notebook here, and I talk about as for instance, here's Centerville, Old Order Amish, located on Cable Avenue Southwest in Kelowna, and as part of the Mid-Prairie School District, physically located within that. And that year, there were 30 students, and the teachers were Audrey Yoder and Kathleen Rupp. Audrey with 9 years experience, Kathleen brand new with 1 year. And on through, I've got that directory, and then I've got all of the stats that I compiled. My job was to first, you do know that all of these exempt populations were required to administer the Adventist basic skills.
Yes.
Okay. My job in the spring of the year, I would go physically and visit every one of those schools. A most delightful experience for me to see this culture in operation. And I remember distinctly some of the the particular visits, the particular sites, the teachers, students over there, the smells in the room, the stove on a cold morning going like crazy in the middle of the room there with kids' lunches, sandwiches and stuff on top of the stove to be heated up for their lunches. And I visited with the teacher and observed what was going on in the classroom educationally. And then I collected the results of the basic skills that have been administered and went through those and saw what kind of growth was happening within the schools. And for the most part, was very impressed with that. The students seem to be doing quite well. And what is of significance, and I don't know whether you have thought about this in your study, but when you go into an older Amish school, the students in there that are first graders are children who quite likely, when they get into that school setting, have never heard an English word spoken. The language in the home is German. They have learned German as infants and children, and when they get to school, they don't know the English language. And so when you consider the fact that they come in there at probably age 6, some of them age 5, without knowing any of the English language, and in a few years they are required to sit down, pencil in hand, and read the English language and respond to the questions posed for them in the English language. That in itself is from my perspective, is a significant accomplishment. Now, the school setting, all of them, and again, I'm back in the 80s and 90s that I'm talking about. I don't know what the situation is today. They spoke typically only English in the school setting. If you wanted to speak German, you did that at home. When you are in the educational setting here, the language is English, and you are expected to learn and master the English language. So, thinking about that to me is fairly significant, and the fact that they could do as well as they did with this English test, having walked into that school a few years earlier with no English language in their repertoire at all. I think quite a feat.
I think so too. I guess I was not aware that they only spoke German at home. That's an interesting fact.
That may very well, and let me the school, and I'm sure all of you know this, that the exemption, the issue came to a head in '65 in an old order Amish setting. That was the Amish population in the Hazelton area. The exemption that was crafted, 299.24, that exemption was often referred to as the Amish exemption. And it indeed was initially applied to Amish populations, Amish religious groups. Since that time, and again, I cannot speak for today. I do not know what's happened since 1996. What I do know is that when I finished the process in 1996, I dealt with about 40 exempt populations, and those exempt populations were of a variety. There were a number of them. excuse me. No, that's right. 40 is correct. Of the 40 religious groups exempted, only 2 are in their initial 2-year exemption. I'm reading this from the report that I prepared dated June 3, 1996 to go to the State Board of Education for approval of the groups applying for the religious exemption. 38. So there were a total of 40 schools at that time, 40 schools operated by, and they were not by any stretch all old order Amish. There were schools that were Mennonite. There was a school in Dallas Center Christian, that was Dunkard. That's Dunkard, a reference to the dunking baptism, okay? / River Brethren, and that group operated and had the exemption. There was a group of Beachy Amish, several groups of Beachy Amish, differing from the old order Amish in terms of their beliefs and what they would allow and how they live their lives. There was a group of New Order Amish. So we had in 1996 there were 40 populations exempt. The majority of them old order Amish, yes, but there were a number of Mennonites, Beachy Amish, New Order Amish, Dunkard River Brethren that were all a part of that as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
This helps us with some perspectives that maybe we didn't get clear on the reading. I know it cleared a couple of things up for me, and I haven't done the extensive work that the girls have had. If we have a question, do we have your permission to call you back?
Absolutely, you do. And I want to applaud the 4 of you. I guess there are 4 young ladies there, and you, Deb. I want to applaud the 4 of you for doing this, for taking a look at this, and thinking about the significance of religious beliefs and accommodating. We've seen so much of this in our modern culture, in the things that we have, and some of them may run contrary to the beliefs of any of the 5 of us in this conversation. But we have learned as a nation. We've got quite a mix here. We used to be the melting pot, meaning for me that we were interested in everybody that comes into our shores becomes one of us, whoever us is. The majority of us being the white population. The melting pot concept has been I think diminished largely, and we're now in a state of a tossed salad kind of thing. We've got a mix of ingredients. All of them have their place. All of them have their rights. All of them can do within the limits of what our overall laws and requirements and the Constitution calls for, can live according to the beliefs that they have, and function in the society openly and honestly and without fear of retribution. We're moving in that direction increasingly, and this was really, from my perspective, a real opener for that kind of thing by having a situation here in which the religious beliefs of a population simply conflicted with what the state, and using the state with the small s, what the state required. And accommodation was made. And those children have continued to be educated, and all of them, and I was in all of those schools, I saw the experiences those kids were having, and they were getting a good, even in the older Amish, they were getting a good solid education. The parents wanted their children to be educated to the level that they could manage their own lives, they could read the Bible and worship their God, they could take care of what God had provided them in terms of the farm and family. Folks, when you get to that point, you've had enough education. Now it's time to get your coveralls on and go out and work. And so, yeah, it's. I applaud you for looking at this, and I would encourage you to, and pardon my rambling, but I would encourage you to look at it in the context of what's happening in our societies today.
Well, one big piece that we have to work on is the impact. And so your thoughts there will be very helpful as we talk about what the impact is. So I appreciate that. Well, I'm going to get the girls back to class. As much as they don't want to go back to class, they're going back to class.
I understand that.
And if we have any other questions, we will be sure and give you a call.
That's great. Ladies, I've enjoyed visiting with you. Sorry that I required you to, or asked you to repeat some of your questions and so on, and I hope that the answers you got were digestible.
Yes, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that's a lot of good information. Now you're going to really need to go back and listen to it again.